Well, I'm blessed today to be able to sit down and have a conversation with Dr. Steve Horn. He's the executive director of the Louisiana Baptist Convention, and he's a friend. We've known each other for quite some time over the years, kind of coming through together. And certainly, whether it be committee work or just convention, different things, I have just been so blessed to be able to follow what God's done through his life and through his ministry, and certainly now at the Louisiana Baptist Convention, doing a great job. And so certainly, Dr. Horn, appreciate you sitting down with me today for a few minutes. And glad to have
thank you, Paul. Thanks for what you do. And it's just upon hearing what you're doing through this, it's been exciting to me and exciting to be a part today and have a good conversation, I trust, with you.
Well, just in full disclosure, I'll let everybody know I've given you 7 questions. I don't know that we'll get to all 7 of them. It really depends on you, because I'm going to ask the questions and I'm going to get out of the way. And so,
all right.
We'll just go ahead and just dive in. And so, question 1, and this is for informational purposes. We want people to be aware of what's going on. Sometimes we talk about things, we just kind of take them for granted. And so, one of the things that I forwarded to you was just the fact that many of our church members know very little about the cooperative program, how it works, or what makes their church a part of their local association, the state convention, the Southern Baptist Convention. And so maybe we'll come back to the cooperative program at some point, but can you tell us, as simply as you possibly can, what makes a church a member church of the Southern Baptist Convention?
Yeah, well, that launches us immediately, Paul, into probably more complicated of a conversation than a lot of people think that it is, because technically speaking, historically, and I would say even up to this present point, we've really tried not to use the terminology of member churches. We use instead cooperating churches. In fact, historically, we have believed that the association, the local association, is the only organization that holds members. But that the state convention and the Southern Baptist Convention, instead of having members, has cooperating churches. And so the technical question really becomes, so what deems a church as a cooperating member? And there I go using that word. But
it's hard not to. It's hard not to.
I know it's hard not to. Exactly. A cooperating church within the Southern Baptist Convention. And that's where we would go to the SBC's governing documents to understand that. And so then what we're really talking about is, how is it that a church gets to send messengers to the annual meeting, or as that we usually call it, the convention this year, Indianapolis. And so people are talking about, what's going to happen in Indianapolis. Last year, we were talking about New Orleans. And so that's the annual meeting, the annual 2-day meeting. And so the governing documents really speak to what allows a church to send messengers. And when we look at that, then, back to that language that you are a member of a church that is cooperating with the Southern Baptist Convention. And what the documents say about how a church is deemed to be cooperating is really if they've made the decision to cooperate. And they've given evidence that they're cooperating. That might be, and they're not specific. The documents are not specific about what that intentionality is. It gives an example of turning in an ACP, for example. Another example would be maybe some church vote action where they say, we want as a church to be in cooperation with the Southern Baptist Convention. And then that you give through the cooperative program, or now as it is stated, and we could talk about this in a little bit when we talk about this year's meeting, but now the wording is giving to the Southern Baptist Convention, or one of its entities. That may be through the cooperative program. It may not be through the cooperative program. And so that's how messengers are decided. And there's a formula about how many messengers a cooperating church can send. to the annual meeting, anywhere from 2 to a maximum of 12, depending upon their level of giving. So, to summarize, really it is the decision of a church. And then we get into the conversation, which is dominating kind of the discussion these days, and that is to be in friendly cooperation with the convention. And to this point, historically, or into recent days, it's been just about in close identity with the Baptist faith and message.
Yeah.
And of course, now we're in a conversation about what does that mean to closely identify with the Baptist faith and message. And then there were some restrictive items, like not endorsing homosexuality, or not being a church that has not dealt with sexual abuse, or not dealt with racism. And so there are some restrictive items. And we're going to talk about this, but now there's being proposed to add yet a 6th, now it will be numbered, item into that list of what is friendly cooperation. And that is in the law amendment, which I know we're going to talk about today, which will add a 6th element, and that is a church that recognizes or endorses or has a woman pastor of any kind. And we'll talk about that, I'm sure.
Yeah, that's one of the, that's one of the struggles, for me. And of course, I've been a Southern Baptist my whole life, from the point in time of my profession of faith as a 10-year-old. And one of the struggles with understanding, really understanding the authority of the Southern Baptist Convention, that the convention is so removed from the local church setting. And so the convention, you've got the association, you have the Louisiana Baptist Convention for us here in Louisiana. You have the Southern Baptist Convention. And just as you said, it's somewhat complicated about how you become a cooperating church and what institutes that. And in some ways, it's somewhat loose. Our cooperation has a certain amount of looseness to it that lends itself to some difficulty in some of these governance things that have come down, whether it be the sexual abuse, things, that have been dealt with executive board. And then, the executive committee, and then also, on down to these things related to certain particularities that are being added. So, it's just hard to navigate those things sometimes when you don't have a clear understanding of how loosely these churches are actually connected and cooperate. So.
Yeah, that's correct. And about that looseness, one of the phrases that gets tossed about quite a bit is from Dr. James Sullivan, who was once upon a time the president of the Sunday School Board, now Lifeway, but in kind of an epic work among Southern Baptists, Baptist Polity as I See It was his title, which that title says a lot, right?
Exactly.
This is as he saw it, as one person saw it.
Yes.
But I think it's Dr. Sullivan who kind of is credited with coining this phrase. That our cooperation is like a rope of sand.
Yes.
We're tied together, but as you've said, it's as loose as a rope of sand is sometimes. And what I tell churches when I go to speak in churches that, I try to help them to see that really that's the best of both worlds, because it is the best of this world that every church is in fact independent. We have a whole classification of churches, and even of Baptist churches that are kind of self-identified as independent and independent Baptist churches. And so sometimes that can be kind of a confusing term, but really we're all, even though we might be affiliated in cooperation with the Southern Baptist Convention, we're still, our local church is independent. That fancy theological word we get to that is autonomous. We're autonomous. That's what we believe, and so it's the best of that world.
That's right.
Then I say that it's the best of another world, and that is that when it's effective, when it's efficient to do so, then we can cooperate together for kingdom-minded purposes. And really, though it sounds like a cliche, there's a lot of truth in this, that we can do more together than we can do by ourselves. And I think our missionary force, or the International Mission Board, is the greatest example of how that is so, that we can do more together than we can do by ourselves.
Well, that leads perfectly. And really, we're already answering the second question, because I mean, as we think about this, I mean, what are the benefits that a church receives? I mean, our church is a cooperating church, on both the associational, the state, and the Southern Baptist Convention level. So what are the benefits that a church receives from being a part of the Southern Baptist Convention?
Well, that's a question that we're always asking ourselves at the Louisiana Baptist Convention, especially as it is in my role as executive director of the state mission services, who are in a sense providing some services, if you will, to our affiliated churches. It's a question we've got to ask ourselves and be able to give a quality answer to it, because I mean, if we're not doing something, then the question is, well, why do we want to be a part of this? Especially if there's contention, as there's controversy. And so, and yet, I don't want to sound like this is the only answer I've got. That becomes complicated too, because I'm not sure that we exist to provide a benefit to our churches. The benefit is really more determined by the church, of how willing is this church to be in cooperation with other like-minded churches for the purposes. And Paul, as I think about your question, I really land on this. As 27 years as a pastor, I land right here, that I think the cooperation that we have, whether that be an association, a state convention, or our SBC, I think the best benefit that we have to that is that it is the most effective way for a local church to achieve an Acts 1:8 mandate. There's nothing we can do to get out of that command that Jesus has upon the church to be a witness in Jerusalem, in Judea, Samaria, and the uttermost, the remotest parts of the world. And that's hard. I mean,
it is.
We got a great church in Ruston, but it's hard to make a difference all over the world, from Ruston, Louisiana, at the scope that we're doing in our work together. So the first thing that comes to my mind when asked about this question of benefit is that I don't know that, I mean, we can be a part of some worldwide things, but as far as making the greatest attempt to fulfill that Acts 1:8 mandate, I believe that it's in that cooperation and in that larger network of churches, pooling our resources, not just our resources, but pooling our financial resources, but pooling our people resources. And I think that there's power, there's benefit in being together. I tell this story a lot, that my wife and I, in Louisiana, we mark things by the remembrance of hurricanes sometimes, right? Unfortunately. My wife and I married in 1992. And so the big hurricane in 1992 was Hurricane Andrew. And we had been married just a few weeks before Hurricane Andrew hit. As a matter of fact, my first days of seminary were canceled because of Hurricane Andrew's effect on South Louisiana. And what I remember about that experience is that being married a few weeks, we went to stay at the house of some other another couple who had just married themselves, and I had linked up with him to carpool to seminary. Their house was no safer than ours. It was 5 miles from our house, but there seemed to be a sense, as young newlywed who'd never gone through this, kind of in charge, I guess, and providing safety for your family. There seemed to be like strength in numbers, right? And I see this cooperation something as a strength in numbers kind of effort. Now, there are some benefits for people of our member churches. Like, for example, I mean, you have to be a member of
Yes.
a Southern Baptist Cooperating Church in order to be considered to be a NAM appointee, to be an IMB missionary appointee. You have to be a member of a Cooperating Southern Baptist Church to serve on a board of one of our entities. You going to one of our 6 Southern Baptist seminaries, you get a discount from those 6 seminaries because you are a member. I'm not sure that any of those things are reason enough to be a part, but to give full answer to your question, there are those kinds of benefits.
Absolutely.
We've had in this environment, and that's probably always been the case, but more noticeable to me in my role, we've had some churches that have left their cooperation with us for variety of reasons.
Yeah.
And some of those folks have kind of come back and said, I miss the fellowship, I miss the network that we have. So I would say those aren't reasons enough to be a part. There are part of the whole of the answer to benefits.
Yeah, I think and I think sometimes some of us at the local church level, and especially probably maybe more so than in other parts of the United States, certainly here in the South, we kind of have this anti-establishment sort of distrust of authority kind of thing, and a very high view of the autonomy of the local church, certainly that's distinct, to the Baptist polity and just our way of thinking, and the volatility of our culture, the current culture that we're living in, things are changing so quickly, and of course the media, the way things get blown probably out of proportion oftentimes, and seems like our society stays stirred up about one thing or another, and so we have to be very careful. Certainly we don't want to incense anyone or get folks worked up about these different things, but certainly there's always, and there always have been, as long as Southern Baptists have been a convention, there's always been threats to the unity of the Southern Baptist Convention, and certainly there are now. And so at this time, with all the volatile cultural environment that we're in, and these challenges to unity, what would you say are some of the challenges to unity and mission facing the Southern Baptist Convention today?
Yeah, I think this is where really we begin to have the conversation of where the rubber meets the road in our SBC context right now. And I've heard recently that unfortunately SBC, if you use the word politics, which I guess at the end of the day is what it is, to some degree, that it has a tendency to mirror American politics, but maybe lag slightly behind. And I think there's probably some truth to that kind of generalization. So I think you hit on it. I think that the ease of access that people have to people's writings and people's sermons and statements. The truth of the matter is, I could say something in this podcast that could just really be, problematic for me.
Or someone could cut and take one isolated statement out of context.
That's right. And so that kind of gets to the issue that it's a perfect storm to some degree because of these cultural issues. But really, I think it comes down to this. How willing is a church? How willing are they to cooperate with other churches when they don't see 100% eye to eye on a particular issue?
Yes.
I think that's the volatility that we are facing today. And it's not just one issue. I've talked about this with lots of people that back in the days of what we would identify historically as the conservative resurgence, that was basically as I look at it, about one issue,
Mhm.
about the inerrancy of Scripture, and folks came down on one side or the other of the issue of inerrancy.
Mhm.
And we're all here today still as Southern Baptists because we believe in that, right? And believe in the inerrancy of Scripture, that is.
Absolutely.
And today, I think what's different about this, some people would say it's nothing different. It's just the issue of the day. But I would probably argue that the difference today is that there's not one issue, but there's, I'm not even sure that it's would be counted how many issues that we have today. I think about this, Paul. I think about how much the world has changed since 2019, and I use that as a reference point because that's when I came into this role. And things that we are being challenged by today, they didn't even exist. There wasn't anybody having a conversation about it in 2019. And now, people will say about these issues that have developed in the last 5 years that they're going to be the undoing of the Southern Baptist Convention.
Yeah, there's that hyperbolic sort of language is just thrown around.
That's a tough environment to be able to navigate. And so if that is so, then I think we got real challenges ahead for us. So I really, if I could put it into kind of a summation, it would be just that: how willing are we to continue to cooperate for the mission? Again, I draw attention back to Acts 1:8 of getting the gospel to all the nations. How willing are we to cooperate with people when we don't see 100% eye to eye on every single issue? And I think that's a safer statement than to talk about what those issues are. How willing are you going to continue to be to cooperate? So we have this conversation all the time about, in the theological world, about tertiary issues, a little simpler terms, secondary issues.
Yes.
So you got first tier, second tier, third tier issues is kind of how theologians usually talk about. I guess it's possible to go beyond 3, but that's usually how I hear it talked about. And I think everybody agrees. Here's our problem. I think everybody agrees that first tier, first level issues, well, there's got to be agreement in order to be in cooperation. The problem is who gets to decide what category a particular issue gets in. It's not that we're in agreement that first tier issues have to be the place of cooperation. What we don't agree on is what category, what level of a theological discussion is a particular matter supposed to go into. And there doesn't seem to be widespread agreement on those kinds of things. And I think that's where our trouble lies today. And it's provided a quite challenging and as you said, volatile sometimes environment.
Yeah. Well, and I think that, of course, we're talking about these third tier issues, and there's one in particular that we're going to be considering, at the upcoming convention, and it's one that has out in the Twitterverse and those kind of things, but also in the Baptist press, whatever. And I don't mean Baptist press, particularly the Baptist press, but I mean the different mediums that we have on Baptist media, or analysis of Baptist life. This has been something that's been quite volatile and talked about a great deal. Of course, it began with the Saddleback issue, at the last couple of conventions. And so if you would just explain what took place with Saddleback, you don't have to go into a great historical, but just what was the issue, and then, of course, what occurred at the past convention that led to what we're going to talk about in a minute, which is the law amendment, which was proposed.
Yeah, so to the best of my chronological recollection, is that the Saddleback issue really dates back to 2021, when there was a motion made to deem them not in friendly cooperation because of the ordination and the calling of 3 women, I believe it was 3 women, into calling them pastors and specifically ordaining them, and kind of making a big deal out of that, with public press releases and the kind. And so that was, as we are likely to do in something like that, instead of dealing with it at that convention, it was referred to the Credentials Committee. who had been empowered by previous messenger body to be able to look at things like this and give recommendation to the SBC's executive committee. Well, and so that gets us to the summer of 2022 and meeting in Anaheim that year, and the credentials committee indicated no decision about Saddleback, but instead originally made a motion, which they pulled eventually at that same meeting, but originally made the motion that a task force, a study group, be formed to consider this matter, since it didn't deal with the lead or senior pastor issue. Well, that like I said, got pulled during the meeting, and so didn't occur until in that year that they made recommendation to the executive committee, the executive to deem Saddleback out of fellowship, out of cooperation. Executive committee sided with them, but it gave Saddleback, according to our documents, according to our rules, the opportunity to appeal that decision to the entire body of messengers, which they did. And so that's kind of the background of how it came to be that then the messengers, not just Saddleback, but there were 3 churches, I believe was the count, that all were deemed not in friendly cooperation at our New Orleans meeting last year. And so that's where it all happened. Now, simultaneous to that is what we have begun to refer to as the Mike Law Amendment, or the Law Amendment, a name for the gentleman, a pastor from Virginia, Mike Law, who originally made this motion to amend our Constitution as SBC to add in that 6th statement to our list of what is in friendly cooperation. And it has that language of pastor of any kind. And so that, according to our rules, has to be voted on at 2 consecutive annual meetings by a 2/3 vote. So the first vote happened in New Orleans in 2023, and it received by a hand ballot vote, by a hand vote, the obvious 2/3. And so it has to be voted on again this summer in Indianapolis. And if it gets the 2/3 vote this year, then it will become part of our governing documents. Now, simultaneous to that, there were a couple of other things that happened last year that aren't talked about as much as the vote on this amendment and the vote on Saddleback, but I think are equally important and weighty to this conversation. And one thing doesn't hardly get talked about at all, and that is that from the floor, the motion was made to add in a couple of words to the Baptist Faith and Message, and where in Article 6 of the Baptist Faith and Message, where it talks about pastors, it adds the words elder and overseer. And so that gives clarity, which I think we probably always agreed that linguistically in the New Testament, that synonymously, whether the word is translated pastor, elder, overseer, it speaks to one word in the Greek language. And so, they wanted to clarify that. I think the big thing that came out of that was that how easy it is to change the Baptist Faith and Message.
That's right.
Even the maker of that motion says that he was surprised that it was allowed to be voted on. He made the motion assuming that it would either be ruled out of order,
be kicked to the committee or something like that,
or to the executive committee for further study, which is kind of what he wanted there be a conversation. Well, I mean, it gets brought to the floor, and it's I think that will probably be corrected now moving forward, but nonetheless, that was the third matter that happened. And then the fourth item that happened, which I think really has a bearing on this whole discussion, is that a motion was made to ask the president to form a study committee, a task force to recommend to this year's annual meeting what does it mean to be in friendly cooperation, or excuse me, what does it mean to closely identify? with the Baptist faith and message. That's the language I'm looking for. What does it mean to closely identify? We've had that language, but we've never talked about what's the definition of closely identify. And as the example is usually given, the conversation has been about maybe pastors and complementarianism in the role of pastor, meaning that it is restricted to males. But we haven't talked about Sabbath keeping.
Yes.
We haven't talked about the ordinance of the Lord's Supper. And we have a variety of opinions about that. Is that included in what it means to be closely identified? And so that's, it's going to be that. To me, if you ask me what am I most interested about in this year's meeting, I'm probably most interested about what's going to be the, if any, recommendations, at least what's going to be the report of this task force task with this study of what does it mean to closely identify.
Yes, sir. And I'm afraid, and I know you are as well, that whatever that report is, it will be, it will just be a great opportunity for criticism on both sides, probably, of the issue. So that's certainly not something that either of us are looking forward to. And
correct, especially in this environment where, as you said a moment ago, that there's a distrust of organization. There somebody's gonna want to indicate that this was sinister, that this was quote, the platform, as has been kind of the wording of the last few years. The platform wanted this, and so the platform, well, the platform doesn't make motions. The motion came from the floor and mandated the platform do something. So I think those are kind of the things happening simultaneously with the vote on the law amendment.
Yeah. Well, I know certainly when we think about the law amendment, what are really some considerations that the delegates should have? I mean, is there thinking about whether or not to, I mean, I know, and I'm just be honest with you, Dr. Horn, it's one of those things, you put this, we all are most conservative Southern Baptists would say, well, just what the Baptist Faith and Message says, that the office of the pastor is to be reserved, for men, as laid out in the Bible. Most of us are complementarian in our way of thinking. And so when you come with an amendment like this, or an amendment is put out there, you almost feel in some ways, if you don't vote for it, you understand what I mean, that somehow you're not in the right camp. And so I'd like for you to just share, what are the considerations we should have when deciding whether or not to vote in the affirmative to place this amendment, in our Constitution bylaws?
Well, I think the first thing that people are going to have to clearly understand is that this, because of the nature of it having already been voted on last year, this is an up or down vote.
Yes.
In other words, at this particular moment in the process, the Mike Law amendment cannot be amended. I mean, it has to be voted on as the messengers voted on it last year. Now, I believe that the president is probably going to move immediately, as he did last year with the churches. I believe that he will move immediately to this being a ballot vote. And so some people have suggested that that might turn out to be a little bit of a different vote. I'm just saying what I've kind of heard. Don't know if that's true or not. But it will be moved to be an immediate ballot vote. So I think that's one consideration. I think the second consideration is the word clarity comes to mind. I think Pastor Mike Law read some and heard some of what he has said, and I think his biggest issue in bringing this matter to bear is for how he outlines the issue of clarity. He wants to bring clarity to this issue, and so he believes that having it in the constitution, trying to make sure I get my word right.
Yeah. Yeah.
That it adds clarity to the situation, that the credentials committee will have real clarity of what they're supposed to do. But I think the messengers are going to have to decide that. I think they're going to have to decide whether or not that in fact does bring clarity. Again, it cannot be amended. But I've heard conversation about what does the word endorse mean?
Yeah.
Because that's the language. If I'm fully complementarian, if I would never, ever, ever call someone a pastor on my staff that's a female, but if I attend my city's ministerial alliance that might have Methodist women who are pastors, and I affiliate with that group, have I risen to the level of endorsement? I think that's where you can make an argument that in the process of wanting to bring clarity, maybe we haven't brought as much clarity as we wanted to on this issue. And then the third item that I would draw perhaps attention to would be this notion that I've heard out there that, there's going to be mass exodus or mass even expulsion of churches. I don't really buy that argument, Paul, and I'll tell you why. Those churches will still have to go through the credentials process, meaning they will have to be turned in. They will have the opportunity to speak to the credentials committee. And so however the vote goes, I don't want people to think that this is the end of the SBC. I don't want people to think that they have to they have to leave or anything like that. There's still a process that has to be played out, that will be played out. And I would probably just offer the encouragement that everybody just take a deep breath when the vote happens in Indianapolis.
Yeah. Well, that is a good encouragement right there. I'm telling you, and I think probably for certainly most of our convention leadership and also our delegates, and just in general, just to remember what the Lord has brought us through, and this is God can bring us through this too. And the biggest, and of course I'm always thinking kind of practically too, about these things, and I know one of the things that maybe is just a consideration, related to the amendment itself and how the sort of the aftermath of it is. And you're talking about, a church has to be sort of recommended to the credentials. There's a process that a church would go through before they got to the point of being deemed not in friendly cooperation. And but also, is the credentials committee, as it's presently constituted, is it prepared to deal with, what the numbers that might, because other churches might, you understand what I mean, in this volatile environment. I think there's some considerations there to think through for those that are thinking about this and sort of weighing into this. Doesn't mean it's wrong to do it. It's just something we need to think about. So.
Right. I maybe I'm not thinking as hard as other people are about this issue. I can kind of only relate it to, what I know in Louisiana. I don't believe, Paul, that certainly here in Louisiana, but I really think across the Southern Baptist Convention, I really don't buy this argument that we have a theological problem when it comes to complementarianism. I really don't. Do we have perhaps a vocabulary problem? Perhaps.
Yeah.
But I'm just not convinced that we have a theological problem. And because of that, I believe that we will see our way out of this present conversation. History kind of tells me that we'll see our way out of this conversation and be right into another conversation.
Oh, yeah. Well, that's right. That's right. And I do appreciate you mentioning the vocabulary problem, because and sometimes it is an opportunity for clarification of terms, that we use in our churches, and what a true biblical definition of a pastor, elder, overseer is. And And that certainly, when you're talking about a children's director or a children's minister that may it right now be labeled children's pastor, or a youth minister director that may be labeled youth pastor, and we can go on down the list,
Correct.
but that person may not be functioning at all in what would be considered a true shepherding, certainly over the opposite sex and over, adults, within
Correct.
a local church. So those are things that absolutely, I think, could be a point of clarity there, be a good thing. So
And it goes back to my earlier comment of how willing are we to be in cooperation with
that's
someone.
right.
I mean, I can understand that we don't want to be in cooperation with someone who sees no problem with there being a female pastor.
Yeah.
But if someone is just been a little loose and negligent on their language, I can be I can still think that a lot of people would
That's right.
be in
And
cooperation with these
yeah.
kinds of folks.
And we can give them the opportunity to tighten up their language too,
Correct.
and
Right.
so.
Correct.
Anyway. But I'm with you on that. I did want to, of course, in full disclosure, we are we're videoing this, or we're recording this on April the 8th. And so right now, the eclipse is going on, and it's getting, it's already cloudy here. And so it's getting really dark outside. So, the
Right.
Lord, is,
I hear some people
think,
screaming outside. I'm like, what are they screaming about? It just dawned on me that they're all looking
yeah,
up.
that's right. It's getting super dark here, but we can't see it here. It's just getting dark. So, I mean, and there's a lot of people online saying that the world's, so, we could be with the Lord by the time this comes out, whether he takes us in death or he just raptures us on out of here. So
There you go.
that'd be great too. We wouldn't have to worry about
would
this,
be- That would be great.
but as we do kind of, back to serious, just as we close out, how can we encourage our people? How would you encourage our people just to pray, for our convention at this time, especially as we move toward June, but just in general, whether it be the Southern Baptist Convention, Louisiana Baptist Convention, all the way down, just our cooperative work. How can we encourage people to pray?
Yeah, thanks for the opportunity to really talk about this. I think one of the most optimistic signs that we have probably in the last year has been the election now of Dr. Jeff Orge in his new role, which he hasn't even assumed yet, but will have done so by the time we meet. And I don't know how many folks are knowledgeable about Jeff Orge's tenure and his experience, but I mean, here's someone who knows SBC in and out, has been a pastor in a pioneer situation in the Northwest, who has been the executive director for the Northwest Convention, which is a combination of Washington State and Oregon State, not the Bible Belt by a stretch of the imagination. Been the president now for a couple of decades, I believe, of what once was called Golden Gate Seminary, now Gateway Seminary. What's important to note about that is the name change is related to a location change that Dr. Orge led that entire campus, faculty, everybody to make. And so, that tells me that he's equipped for the job. I just want to say that it's in my heart to say that I think he's God's man for this hour and in our history. And so I'm thankful for that. But I also, my greatest urging would be that we pray for Dr. Orge and for his transition, for his beginning, because I really believe that he is the kind of leader. He's kind, but he's firm. There's nobody who's going to be able to question his conservatism. And he will lead us. He will lead us well. And I'm thankful for that. And I'm prayerful and I'm hopeful about all of that. And so I would say pray for Dr. Orge and pray for a good start in his tenure and his leadership. I want to remind those who are watching, especially in Louisiana, to pray for our fellow Louisianian and pastor, Philip Robertson, who is the chairman of the SBC executive.
He has been right in the middle of everything, hasn't he?
You know, I've known Philip for 32 years since
Mhm.
we've been seminary students. In fact, spent a semester carpooling together.
Yes.
And so, obviously that makes me pretty biased about Philip, just, friend, and, known him for these many years. And, as well as I've known him through the years, I mean, Philip has just taken on a different level of leadership in the last year plus, as he's been in a very difficult situation and chairmanship in this particular moment in SBC's history. But everybody that I've talked to, man, I'm just so pleased with the kind of the leadership. Even when folks haven't agreed with him,
Yes.
they talked to me about how, and he, even though we were at odds and disagreed about a particular issue,
Mhm.
how much they admire and give credit to his leadership during this time. So I want you to continue to pray for Philip
Absolutely.
as he continues to lead as part of this transition. And then I think, Paul, I would just simply remind all of us to be prayerful that we stay on mission.
Yes.
Dr. Chitwood has led us well to just really just zero in on this idea that the greatest problem that we have in the world is lostness.
That's right. That's right.
And every other problem that we have, whether it be some of the challenges and problems that we have as SBC, or whether it be some of the America's problems politically or globally with the war and famine and
Yes.
all of those things that we have always dealt with, all of those problems, and this is the way that Dr. Chitwood says, all those problems cease to exist the moment that we die,
That's right.
except this problem of lostness. For that lost person. And so, out of the billions of people and out of the billions of people that never had even the opportunity to respond, we've got to stay on mission. I've taken that lead from Dr. Chitwood. And so in Louisiana, I can tell you that 4.6 million people live among us here in Louisiana. We believe that 70% of them are likely lost without a relationship with Jesus. Census wise, we are told that 155 people die every day in Louisiana. And so you put 70% to that 155,
Absolutely.
400 people are dying every day in Louisiana. And it's not just a number. I mean, we throw it out like it's a number, but when we bring it home to Louisiana, that's our family.
That's right.
That's our neighbors. That's our kids' teachers, ball coaches. And I think we've got to keeping that focus and that mission in front of us. And I think we talk about that. I think we've got to keep talking about that. We've got to remain prayerful about that. And that's how I would lead us to pray.
Absolutely. Well, I certainly appreciate you giving this time today. I know you're a busy guy, and certainly appreciate you doing this. And I appreciate your leadership as our executive director, and certainly appreciate your faithfulness. And so thanks so much for coming on here today.
Well, Paul, thank you. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely.